And good evening, everybody. 10:30, just after 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It is Settle the SCoors, Episode 2. Welcome back at the end of another very interesting and eventful week, both for our Colorado Rockies and across Major League Baseball. Hope everybody's had a nice week. Hope everybody's been being able to unwind a little bit tonight as we sit back and settle some scores with this team, this organization. As you guys may or may not have seen from the advertisement, we're going to be talking some minor leagues tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit about the some of the pitching prospects that are coming up in the next, whether it's the next couple months or next couple years. Lot to break into tonight. However, as usual, as those who follow my show, What's the Scoop on Saturday nights know all too well, typically the agenda as advertised on Thursday night and the agenda as actually is presented on Saturday night are completely different because that's how sports works. As such, need to address some breaking news that came out regarding the Colorado Rockies earlier this evening. About 6 p.m. Eastern Time, it was announced that right-hander Daniel Bard will require surgery on his throwing arm flexor tendon. He will miss the rest of the season. This is per MLB.com's Thomas Harding, who covers the Colorado Rockies. Bard was already on the injured list after undergoing an arthroscopic knee procedure back in the winter. But it's likely now, pretty inevitable now, that he'll be moved to the 60-day IL as soon as that roster spot becomes necessary and needed for another player, as he will not be returning this season. And there's a good chance after he has come out and already said to Denver Post's Patrick Saunders, that was relayed via X, that he will finish his rehab from the operation before deciding whether or not he will continue pitching in 2025. For those who followed Daniel Bard's career, both in Colorado and through his bouncing around the league through different organizations, most notably with the Boston Red Sox, but also a couple stints with Chicago, Texas, Pittsburgh, all over. He was drafted back in 2006. He was drafted by the Red Sox, first round pick, and he was selected from a pick that they got from the Yankees when Johnny Damon went from Boston to New York. So Daniel Bard, for those who haven't followed him too much, he's had some history of injury issues with this arm for a while, and it's kind of derailed his career a couple times. He was able to have a bit of a resurgence toward the end, but that and issues with some personal matters, really helped or limited him from what he was able to potentially otherwise accomplish. So hopefully he'll be able to come back healthy, and if he decides to continue his career, looking forward to seeing him bounce back, hopefully in Colorado. And if he doesn't decide to continue his career, wishing him obviously all the best in retirement and in his life beyond baseball. So I just wanted to get through that, just kind of on the more human side of the game a little bit. But to recap last week, for whether you did or did not see episode 1 of Settle the SCoors, I had my good friend Trevor Salzman in here. Thank you again, Trevor, if you're watching, for tuning in last week and being part of that latter 45 minutes of the show. Couldn't have asked for a better way to start the show than or start the show's series than having you on and picking your brain a little bit. So thank you again for that. If you're watching, we talked a little bit about a couple of guys that we liked, guys that we were down on. Trevor mentioned he's a big Chase Dollander guy, one of their pitching prospects, into whom I'll be digging a little bit later on. I spoke a little bit about Brenton Doyle, who's been up for a little bit. Big fan of his approach. He's a little bit inconsistent, but I love watching him play. He's got some agility. He's got some ability to put a bat on the ball more consistently if he can just get a little bit more into his hit tool and tighten up a little bit. So I'm enjoying watching him. He had some nice developments and nice results in the spring, and looking forward to seeing what he does with that through the balance of 2024. With that Chase Dollander mention, I'll segue into what I started talking about, which was the Colorado Rockies farm system. For back into 2023, looked at some of what came out, scouting reports, reviewed some material from the prospects. There's not a ton of it out in 2024 just as of yet, because AAA seasons just started and most of the minor leagues below that haven't kicked off yet. But as of their 2023 update, and this is according to Fangraphs, which is one of the top sabermetric and analytic infused, if you want to call it that, services and websites that covers professional baseball. So according to them, in late 2023 update, because the 2024 updates aren't fully released yet, they had the 16th ranked farm system. So they kind of sit around the middle of the pack, which is a little lower than you'd want an organization to be that's been losing as much as Colorado has the last several years. But definitely better than it was, a couple of years ago. They definitely have started to make inroads the last couple of years under this new regime. So there is some optimism to be had for fans in that regard. I think any conversation with prospects regarding prospects for the Colorado Rockies has to start with Adal Amador. His calling card, he's a middle infielder. His calling card is his hit tool, that's projected to be his elite tool at its peak. It still has room to develop, but that's projected to be his sort of main bread and butter, secret sauce, whatever you want to call there. He's not projected by scouts, many scouts, to hit for a ton of power, and he's not likely to have game-breaking speed. There's expectation that he'll likely suit up long-term at second base as opposed to shortstop, and even whether or not his body type will allow for even the agility to remain at second base down the road. But second base is right now believed to be where his long-term future is. So Amador is kind of the guy who your conversation usually starts with when you're talking about current Rockies prospects. But looking beyond that, there's a few other guys as well who have caught my attention the last couple of days, last couple of weeks, who are going to be at AAA to beginning to the middle of the season, and who could potentially impact the MLB roster more quickly. So I focused in more on those guys who are at higher levels, as opposed to guys who are still down in A ball or high A, things of that nature. Guys who could potentially be seen by fans in Denver more in the near term. Drew Romo, the catcher, is the first one who caught my attention. I'm a big sucker for defense first catchers, as people who will follow my other show know. There are a couple of positions. I'm a believer of the fact that the mindset that you play up the middle, you are willing to sacrifice your bat a little bit and some power for defensive ability, particularly at the positions of catcher, shortstop, and then to an extent center field. Second base, not quite as much, but I still think that second base, that can apply to second base as well. And Drew Romo is a great example of that. His defense is definitely his standout tool. Pretty much anybody who's done reports on him, who's interacted with him, or who has connections even secondarily to him as a prospect, has spoken religiously high about his intangibles, about his just his work ethic, his baseball IQ. He's considered by some to be a potential Gold Glover who should have, even if he doesn't come along with his bat in any significant way, have a high floor as at least a solid backup for his glove and his framing alone. Obviously, pitch framing, at least for now, remains a significant aspect of catching in Major League Baseball, and that's likely to remain the case until such time as if we see the development of, for example, robot umps or however you want to phrase it, unless that comes to development in the next few years, it's likely to not be something that's going anywhere regarding the emphasis that's now put on pitch framing, and his abilities for that are considered to be very much on the high end. where he can improve, there seems to be mixed evaluations of his potential ability to improve his power. His speed could stand to improve too, according to most evaluations and according to most sort of personnel people. However, that's believed a little more to be closer to being maxed out, if not already maxed out. That's not expected to have a ton of room to improve based on where he's at physically in his development as a prospect. It's not as likely that he'll tap more into that than the potential for his ability to tap more into his power. There was a quote from The Athletic, which I highly recommend a subscription to The Athletic for anybody who follows baseball as in depth as a lot of the people who are on, whether it's the Rocky Mountain Sports Network, whether it's our affiliated networks. Highly recommend a subscription to The Athletic for any number of sports. Baseball, football is great. I use it for hockey. I use it for even college sports. But a scout from The Athletic was quoted as saying he cannot recognize spin, and his whiff rates on non-fastballs were way too high in AA. Whiff rate is another one of those things that will be referencing a good amount on this show. It's one of those kind of more sabermetric analytical sort of phrases, but it's pretty cut and dry, as it's just referring to when he's swinging at a pitch and not making even foul contact, and his propensity to do that on non-fastballs was much higher than you'd want it to be at a level like AA at his point in his development, according to this one scout. Before I continue on that, we've got a comment coming in from Kenny. How you doing, buddy? I'm glad to see you in. Hope you had a great week, and hope work is going well. Says, what's up, Scoops? On DBR, I'm the stepfather. On STS, I'm calling myself the professor. I'm going to ask you some questions tonight. Hope you did your homework. Haha. I'm ready for it, Kenny. Give me what you got. I'm looking forward to it. Trevor says, Board may have just pitched his last game as a Rockies. Contract ends at the end of the season. Yeah, from the Rockies standpoint, and just from the standpoint of, if they want him to try and be able to do a resurgence, and if he intends to even come back, I could see him doing kind of what Nate Eovaldi and others have done in the past, where they maybe pick up a minor league deal with an option, or a deal that's kind of a converted deal. I don't know exactly what the official phrasing of it is, but a deal that starts with minor leagues and allows you to get compensated differently if you're promoted to the majors, so it's not quite an incentive-based deal, but I could see something like that if he wants to come back for another season, and if they, are open to giving him the chance to kind of have a better quote unquote swan song than he would have if this is how his career ends. But he's going to make that determination. It sounds like at the very end of his rehab. Once all of this passes later in 2024 and into 2025. Trevor says, Rockies need more pitching talent in their farm system. There's only one pitching prospect in Colorado's top 10 prospect list. That guy is last year's first-round pick, Chase Dollander. Yeah, Trevor, I actually was just mentioning that your appreciation for Dollander. I mentioned that a little while ago, and I'm going to be circling back to talk about him in a little bit here. But I agree. I think that there's a lot to see in Dollander as, they're perhaps most likely. I don't want to use the word savior, but they're most likely the prospect that they can most hang their hat on for their rotation going forward of the ones that are currently in their system. I think there's a lot of backing to say that Chase Dollander is that guy if you have to pick one. I'm going to be going over three pitchers in a little bit here, but and Dollander is going to be one of them. And just kind of looking at a little bit of the scouting breakdown of what different people are seeing, and kind of what some of the expectations are, some of what I've seen, and all of that. So stay tuned for that in a few moments here. But glad to have you on, Trevor. Hope you're doing well, and glad to have you on, Kenny. Glad that you had some time to tune in tonight. Looking forward to what you've got to share tonight. And also, just real quick, I just want to do shout out to everybody over at both Rocky Mountain Sports Network. If you're, if you're a Bronco fan or not, highly recommend the Denver Bronco Roundup content, which is now twice a week, Tuesdays and Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then our good friends over at K&K Sports Network, obviously my affiliation still over there, with Kenny and Kurt, Paul, Carson, Joey Clams, and then all the New Jersey All-In and high school sports content that Jenny Hoops and Kurt do. Highly recommend all of that content. There's never going to be a dull moment when it comes to looking for sports content on either of those networks. They're always going to have something to satiate your appetite for that. Coming back into the prospect side of things, going back to talking about Drew Romo, which is I left off with that quote from the scout, kind of just critiquing his propensity for not being able to handle non-fastballs particularly well in Double-A. So that's going to be obviously something that he has to improve on going into this season. His exit velocity, which is a term I used last week, is below where I wanted. I mentioned last week you'd want that for your optimal chance to make contact. You typically want that to be high 90s or above. His so far, and this goes back to the beginning of 2023, his is so far averaging around 84 miles per hour, so definitely not where you'd want that. He's more of a line drive hitter right now than someone who's likely to lift the ball much for home runs, even in Coors Field. And these numbers are according to StatCast, by the way. That covers from the beginning of last season through yesterday. So if I'm looking at him, he's not going to be from best I can tell, and from what the scouts and analysts who have been doing this a lot longer than I have, there's not really a belief that he's going to be one of those guys coming to Coors Field and hitting 40 home runs. The hope is just that he doesn't become somebody who strikes out 30 to 35% of the time, and that he can get enough to some of that power that could develop a little bit more without having those high strikeout rates that can obviously significantly limit that. Estevan Florial and others who we've seen have very loud tools recently, but without being able to hit that level of contact. All right, Kenny says, question 1, since you're talking about the minors, for a team like the Rockies, would it be smarter to develop their youngsters in the minors or call some up to the majors? So I think that turns into a case-by-case basis. I know that there's a tendency sometimes when you're talking about pitching in leagues where you go to leagues like the PCL, those numbers can be very inflated when it comes to offense. So there's a lot of sort of difference in weighting, weighting meaning WEIGHT, in weighting when it comes to certain results and how particularly pitchers perform, but also hitters as well on the flip side of things. I tend to be a guy, and I feel this way with baseball. I feel this way typically with football, with quarterbacks and such. I tend to be a guy that says you got to turn them loose. However, that being said, when you turn them loose, you can't do what I've seen other organizations do time and again, pick your sport, whether it's baseball, football, which is have these guys come up, play them for, half the time, platoon them with somebody else, not let them get consistent playing time, not let them, make the mistakes and figure things out, put them on the shuttle back and forth up from AAA to majors, and then end up these guys basically top off at quad A players because they're constantly being shifted around, either not getting consistent playing time, having the level of competition constantly is shifting, but also the way of preparing, the way of developing yourself between games, the routine, all of that. That's all shifting when you're talking about messing up these guys in terms of, in my mind, you got to go out and, for example, and I'll use football as an example. If you've got a quarterback, whether it's it could be Broncos or anybody else, if you're going to put somebody in there who you draft in the first round, and you're going to put him in there week 1, you got to be prepared to let him make the mistakes. He's not going to come in more likely than not. He's not going to come in and be the second coming of John Elway, week 1, week 2. And the lack of patience, particularly now more than ever, when you've got social media, you've got obviously a lot more money on these guys. Pick your reason as to why. There's so much more on these guys at this level that becomes, these owners and these GMs, the front offices who now have more influence over the 26-man roster than ever before, or specifically the game day operations than ever before. You have to be able to have that patience. You have to be able to let these guys develop. But yeah, I agree that you don't keep these guys stuffed at AAA. If these guys are hitting the cover off the ball, hitting 850 OPS, hitting 280 or hitting 20 home runs, I agree that you don't just kind of sit there and let them sputter or whatnot. But you also don't do what a team like New York did and call up a guy like Oswaldo Peraza to only play him half the time. Like, you have to have a commitment, have a direction, and then stand by it and double down on it. So if they're able to do that, then that's great. Now, again, it's a case-by-case basis. There are some guys who I think need more time in the minors than others for myriad reasons, whether it's perhaps injury related, whether there's sometimes there's just personality things that you question whether a guy is ready to mentally handle some of what it takes to succeed in the majors, whatever it is. So I'm not saying that it's a 100% of the time you handle it all the same way. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but typically that's my thought, because otherwise I think that the guy might be, the floor might be higher, but you're gonna have a less chance to reach a ceiling, I think. Thank you for the question, Kenny. I appreciate that. Going back now to my discussion on Romo for the time being. Actually, that was pretty much all I had to say on Romo. The next guy I was going to be talking about, for those who are following the prospects as well, there's an outfielder, Jordan Beck, is another guy that has caught my attention. Compared to Romo, he's got better projections with regard to his power. He definitely strikes out more than you'd like, which, as I kind of mentioned a little while ago, sometimes that has a tendency to limit how much you're able to access that power in games. That kind of becomes the difference between game power and raw power, if you hear those differentiations. He's got relatively middling tools in the field. However, going back to that, I talked about exit velocity and launch angle. I like his a lot better than in that same span than I've liked those of Drew Romo. Is about a 92 launch angle miles per hour, 92 miles per hour exit velo average, which I like a lot better. That's a lot closer to that benchmark that I mentioned. And he's got a very, very sweet launch angle of about 14 degrees, which, again, if you're talking about that benchmark, that threshold I mentioned last week, he gets too close to it a lot more. So I'm a lot more keen on his potential ability to access and maximize his offensive ability than I am that of Drew Romo. That said, he does have middling tools in the field, and his speed will likely position him, my guess is, best for right field, as long as his arm can yield the results necessary strength-wise to succeed there. If not, there's a good chance that his long-term hole would probably be more in left. I just don't see him having the range and the athleticism necessary to be a long-term center fielder. And typically when you play guys at those positions, technically their offensive tools play down a little bit. And I don't think that's a risk that they want to take with Beck, who's somebody who's already got a propensity to be pretty high with the swing and miss. The other guy that I was looking at was Jeff Criswell. Criswell is somebody who, he's kind of the last guy that I look at as the sort of, maybe not necessarily calling him top guys, but he's kind of the last guy that I look at and say, well, this is a guy who is fairly well regarded, who could be a significant impact for them, or a more significant impact for them, more in the near term. Just turned 25. This is a pitcher, in contrast to the guys that I mentioned last year. Walked too many guys at AAA. Walked over 5 per 9 innings. Was not a fan of that. Do like his strikeouts ability. He was striking out more than 10 per 9 innings. But it goes back to what I was talking about with Trevor last week, talking about these guys, walking too many guys, giving up too many home runs, and he's not been getting the ball on the ground at any sort of significant rate. And those, I think, are going to be, going to keep him at AAA for at least most of this year, if not longer, unless they decide to try and give him an early go, sometimes as teams do, sometimes as a reliever, someone deep in the bullpen. I could see that being a way that they choose to go. But his first season in Colorado after coming over from Oakland was not a particularly inspiring one at AAA. They did get 26 starts out of him. They did get over 120 innings out of him. But if you're talking about some of what scouts see in terms of his fantastic breaking ball, his 4-pitch mix, which includes a fairly average fastball, as well as both a curve and a change. In terms of his ability to really tap into maximizing that, he's just not near that point right now. And what's holding him back is the fact that his command is not projected to be very high, which is another thing that has people, including myself, believing that he's likely a long-term bullpen piece, which, again, a lot of these guys who had high walk rates but high strikeout rates turn into very good relievers. So I think there's a very legitimate potential future for him there. As long as if he can get a little bit more out of that fastball, I would like that a little bit more because I don't love his fastball slider combo right now. If you're talking about some of the guys that they'll have to face in the NL West, but if he can juice a little bit more of that orange, then I think you've got the potential for something really intriguing coming out of that Colorado bullpen at some point. Trevor says, if you were the GM of the Rockies, what is the first move that you make? Pardon me. That's a good question. I think if you're looking at, I'm actually going to go a little bit off the board with this one because I initially, my thought process was going to be looking at, just pure player personnel, either trading away somebody or bringing in somebody. But I'm going to go a little bit different. I'm going to say I'm calling up Driveline. I'm calling up Sports Info Solutions. I'm calling up every analysis, 2024 current cutting edge analysis, sabermetric analytics, whatever you want to call, however you want to phrase it. I'm calling up every player development center I can find, and whether it's someone like where someone like Dylan Lawson came from. I'm calling up anybody that I can and getting the most knowledgeable and most, not necessarily most experienced, but definitely the most current, I guess I would say, minds that I can think of who know what I don't know. That's the first thing I'm doing is I'm seeing what do I have talent-wise in my front office, what is everyone's strengths, and wherever I feel like I'm lacking in the strengths, I'm calling these different I don't know what you would call them, but these different organizations, and I'm bringing in the best people that I can, and I'm completely overhauling my some of these places, some of these player development departments and whatnot, who are absolutely just behind the times when it comes to organizations like Houston. Speaking of Houston, how you doing, Jody? Off topic, but my Astros are in a lot of trouble. Yeah, not a great time for me to mention the Astros, was it? I'm blown away by that. I personally think that it's not going to last just because, again, I've seen Houston kick our tails for the last 7 years, whatever it's been. So I'll believe it when I see it in terms of this actually being what the Astros are going to be this year. But things like happening with, Valdez and what we saw from Brown the other day, definitely not something that was encouraging if you're a Houston Astros fan. Jody says Chris Bryant and Jose Abreu are battling for lowest average in the MLB. Yeah, I could not have imagined saying that a couple of years ago. Jose Abreu has been, I think, on a little bit more of a precipitous decline over the last couple of years. Chris Bryant he just fell off a tractor and got run over by it. Scoops, when it's appropriate on the main roster. Your thoughts on Zeke Tovar, 22 years old, batted .259 last year, 17 homers, 73 RBI, off to fast start this year, batting .333, 2 home runs. Yeah, so Tovar is somebody I mentioned last week. Definitely enjoy watching him. Think he's going to be big time for Colorado going forward. Like you said, his batting average has been very, very solid to start the season. He's hitting the ball hard. He's getting it on that sweet spot. He's in 80th percentile on that. He's barreling the ball up. Now, there are some issues. He's another guy he's getting too much. He's chasing too much, getting too much swing and miss for my liking. Not loving what I'm seeing from him so far defensively. So he does have areas in which I'd like to see him improve. But again, it's the season is still a baby at this point. So, and he's got above average sprint speed. So he definitely has the ability to make those improvements with his range and his defense. But offensively in particular, I like what I'm seeing. And if he can just make more consistent contact, I think you're looking for a really exciting year potentially from this guy. But the concern that I have is you talk about his batting average, and his expected batting average is, his expected batting average is over 100 points lower than his actual batting average. So I'm seeing the potential for some regression there. It's not quite as significant with other things like his slugging percentage and whatnot. But again, I'm not sure that content that he's making is sustainable. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not, at least at the 340 level. But he's got to bring up those those expected numbers from above the 230s for me to be as confident in him carrying this over 162. But completely agree with you that if he's able to do that, and he's able to cut down on that swing and miss. I'm going to be excited to see what he's able to produce this year. It says, sorry, could he be the face of the Rockies? Sorry to add that. Oh, forgot to add that. Oh, okay. So again, I think it's hard to say at this point without me being able to be confident in his ability to maintain that. I think he's gotten off to obviously, like you said, a really hot start, but I'm not 100% confident. In fact, I'm fairly skeptical, cynical, whatever you want to say, about his ability to do so. His expected batting average the last 2 years was just under 250 both years. In fact, it was only one 1,000th of a point off last year from the year before. So, and it's not too far from where it is this year. So the fact that his expected numbers compared to his numbers of what he's actually doing right now are that much of a discrepancy, I'm just not really 100% buying it so far. His numbers, those expected numbers that I mentioned, are pretty much right on par with league average right now. And if you're getting a league average offensive production out of him, then that's perfectly good with me for somebody who plays the position that he does. Like I mentioned with shortstop earlier, as long as that defense picks up a little bit, because I haven't liked the way that it started the season. But so again, if you get even that league average offensive production, I'm still fine with that. But his current trajectory, not 100%. We'll have to see if that can be maintained. I'm going to take a break from this for a moment before I get into my pitching prospects to talk a little bit about our sponsor, Morgan Trinkets. With over 33 years experience, they are your headquarters for Southwest pottery and jewelry, as well as an estate gold at wholesale prices. Started in 1990, once a nationwide company, now they do shows exclusively in northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. All their gold is real gold, 10, 14, or 18 karat gold. And all their silver is sterling silver. How do you find Morgan Trinkets? On Facebook by searching Morgan Trinkets today. If you catch Morgan Trinkets at one of their shows, they take all major credit cards. On Facebook, they take PayPal, and all orders are shipped free over $50. Check out Morgan Trinkets. That's Morgan Trinkets on Facebook today. So, pardon me. Now, after that, I will be getting into a little bit of what we talked about before. I've got 3 top pitching prospects that I'm going to be mentioning in this next little segment here, including my buddy Trevor's guy, Chase Dollander. I'm going to be leading off with him and sharing a couple of others as well before I tie this into something that happened earlier this week that's a little more league-wide based for anybody who's watching but may not be 100% pure Colorado Rockies. Chase Dollander, as we mentioned, he's 22 years old. He's got kind of a rising fastball, tops out at 99 miles per hour. He's got some lateral movement on that, which is always nice to see at the tail end of its trajectory. 4-pitch mix. He uses a fastball, slider, curve, and change. His command is not likely to be great, but will likely, at least if it tops out where it should approach average, perhaps a little bit better. So that's a little bit of what we've got on him. He's got definitely some things to be excited about, especially like I mentioned, his fastball is a lot of fun to hang your head on if you're somebody who's really excited about that type of pitch movement and just watching individual pitches from these young guys. He's definitely got one of the more interesting ones to work with and to dream on, and we'll see how that develops, obviously, going forward. Trevor says, Rockies win tonight on the road in Toronto, 12-4. Love to see that. Anytime Denver or Colorado wins and anytime Toronto loses is always a good day for me. So I'm excited to see that, and by a relatively good margin as well. So thank you for sharing that, Trevor. I hadn't seen that yet. And Trevor, if you think that if you want to chime in on anything that I've said about Dollander, if you think there's anything that you want to add to what I've said, please let me know, because again, I've not watched him nearly quite as much as you have. Jody says, if I were the Rockies, trade Blackmon to a contender. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week. Again, it's one of those things where if I think of it from a perspective of just giving him a chance to win, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I would definitely be advocating for that, at least closer to the deadline. However, some good points were brought up, and if you think of a guy like Eduardo Rodriguez, who was a starting pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. Excuse me, I don't think he's in Arizona now, but I can't 100% remember. But Rodriguez was on a very subpar team with Detroit, but he didn't want to uproot his family, didn't want to completely overhaul his lifestyle and move and all this stuff. So he was like, no, I'm happy in Detroit. I'm riding it out in Detroit, all of that. So I would be curious to see what happens with Charlie Blackmon in that regard, because there was some discussion with Trevor last week that indicated potentially there's some belief that he could be someone who falls in that category, who would rather finish his career as a long-time or a career Colorado Rocky, as opposed to somebody who goes and perhaps spends a half a season somewhere else to potentially chase a title. So I do wonder how that would play out, but just both sides of that there as well that I hadn't actually thought about in the beginning. Okay, yeah, Eduardo Rodriguez is still with Arizona. And tying, Scoops, extra credit question. If you went to a Rockies game, what beer are you drinking? None. I can't drink alcohol, so none. If you've got that, whatever that cream soda brand is that I really like, then I'll definitely have some of that. But no alcohol for me personally. I'll enjoy watching the fans around me drink it, though. That being said, second pitcher that I was going to talk about, not seeing any further comments at this time. I mentioned a little bit last week about Victor Vodnik, 24 years old, finally talking about somebody older than me for a change. He's got a rising fastball, tops out at 100 miles per hour, a little bit higher graded upside than that of Dollander, but not quite as heavy on the lateral x-axis movement, a little more on the velocity. His mix is three pitches. He's got a fast, a slider, and a changeup. It doesn't, unlike Chase, does not throw a curveball. He's got lower level command than Dollander does. Likely looking at him to be a little more suited to be a middle reliever. But of any of the three pitchers, his pitch movement is the highest. Got about 2,200 rotations per minute for both his fastball and his breaking ball. So he's got pretty consistent rotational movement on across the board on his pitches, which is something that will help if he ends up suited to a short relief role that sees him pitching more like a one inning guy. And the next guy that I was going to bring up was Anthony Molina. I laugh saying that name because my favorite movie, if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it, is Draft Day with Kevin Costner. And Anthony Molina is the name of the owner of the Cleveland Browns in that movie. Highly recommend that. But when I read Anthony Molina, I always think of that movie. Molina was a Rule 5 draft pick from Tampa in December 2023. He's got, as in contrast to the first two guys, he's got, and this is what I was talking about with Trevor last week, he's got a sinking fastball, which I know Trevor has talked about that being something that Colorado should be looking to kind of move away from that one archetype somewhat with the pitchers that they pick up. However, he never topped more than 1.1 home runs allowed per 9 innings in Tampa system. And he always kept his peripherals pretty strong, was never walking more than 3 batters per 9 innings. and his strikeouts were always over 7 per 9 innings. So not optimal, not the highest that they could be, but definitely workable. And if he can maintain his trajectory of his ground ball rate, which has been over 40%, he should be able to be a serviceable back end of the rotation innings eater, as long as his defense doesn't let him down. He's got a 3-pitch mix as well. His changeup actually, it's a rare case. His changeup may actually being the best of the 3, which the changeup doesn't move quite as much as the other pitches that I've mentioned. And there's not as much bite or velocity behind it, but his command is probably the most. You're probably able to bank on his command more than either of the other 2 pitchers, which is obviously significant if you're trying to develop somebody as a starting pitcher long term. And that's been a major issue for some of the recent draftees as well. Now, talking about this is a good segue into some of what happened earlier this week regarding the Major League Baseball Players Association. For those who haven't seen, there's been, surprise, another dispute between MLB and the MLB Players Association, because that's been the par for the course the last couple of years, ever since the lockout and even before. But the Players Association's chief, Tony Clark, issued a statement recently, and he was talking about the pitching clock, because obviously if you guys have seen, there's been an uptick in injuries, particularly with pitchers to start the season, both pitchers and hitters, but particularly with pitchers. And he was quoted as saying, quote, "Despite unanimous player opposition and significant concerns regarding health and safety, the commissioner's office reduced the length of the pitch clock last December, just 1 season removed from imposing the most significant rule change in decades. Since then, our concerns about the health impacts of reduced recovery time have only intensified. The league's unwillingness thus far to acknowledge or study the effects of these profound change, I think that's supposed to say these profound changes, is an unprecedented threat to our game and its most valuable asset, the players." Major League Baseball, of course, subsequently pushed back on that, saying that the statement ignores the empirical evidence and much more significant long-term trend over multiple decades of velocity and spin increases, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, that are highly correlated with arm injuries. Nobody wants to see pitchers get hurt in the game, which is why MLB is currently undergoing a significant comprehensive research study into the causes of this long-term increase, interviewing prominent medical experts across baseball, which to date has been consistent with an independent analysis by Johns Hopkins University, and it continues on and on. And it goes on to say that Johns Hopkins found no evidence that pitchers who worked quickly in 2023 were more likely to sustain an injury than those who worked less quickly on average. They also found no evidence that pitchers who sped up their pace were more likely to sustain an injury than those who did not. So, according to this statement and this analysis that was independently apparently done by Johns Hopkins University, seems like there's not a ton of agreement by these two sides as to sort of the background and the fundamental basis on where these are coming from. And as somebody who's watched this develop, and I've been watching baseball consistently since 2012, and I've been watching baseball at baseline since 2007. I do not, again, and I don't have a ton of empirical on this just yet. I'm still working on that. I'll be bringing that to you guys once I have more of it. But from what I'm seeing so far, there's not been a ton of water to connect to me that there's a lot to tie into the velocity itself, because velocity was, first of all, there's been pitchers who have thrown 90s, high 90s for a while. Throwing in the 100s, while it's not necessarily been around forever, has been around for a decent amount of time. And this uptick in injuries just the last couple years has really spiked, and is not, it's not like that was sort of a progressive increase over an extended period of time. This was pretty drastic and pretty sudden. And that, in my vantage point, correlates more with the increase on spin rate. Now, obviously, you tie in spin rate with velocity, and that obviously adds another element to it and adds another factor to it. But it seems to me that there's a stronger correlation of causation between that when it comes to spin rate than with pure velocity. And I think some of that as well is I was listening to somebody earlier today talking about it, and he was talking about pronation and supination when it comes to movement on certain pitches. Again, because it's not just anymore. It's not just pure slider, changeup, curve, whatever you want to say. There are so many more variations now of these pitches that are being thrown. There's a lot more, again, when it comes to spin rate and some of those unnatural movements, and then doing it with that level of velocity and that level of torque. That I think when you add those things together, I think it definitely creates more of a source of the issue. But I think that if you're looking at it equitably between spin rate and velocity, I don't think that I don't think it's entirely 50-50 based on the way that we've seen things progress and how we've watched things develop. I don't recall the individual who was speaking that was discussing that, but from a mechanics standpoint, there would be there's just a stronger basis when you look at some of the ways that not just the style of pitching, but the manner in which these different pitches are being thrown and the way that pitches are developing, and the way that the guys are being coached, not just in the majors, but guys are being coached down from, whether it's 12U, 14U. I don't know exactly where guys would start throwing different types of pitches, but that's something that seems to me to be more fundamental to the game, and not just starting and ending with either the league or the Players Association. So that's something to definitely dive more into, and it's something I will be diving more into in future weeks. But this one report by CBS Sports, just in and of itself, goes on to say, according to CBS Sports senior research editor Doug Clawson, 8 of the top 10 starting pitchers since 2021, as judged by ERA with a minimum of 40 starts, are currently on the injured list or on rehab assignment. And it goes on to mention 10, the top 10, and 8 of those 10 are currently either out for the season or out for at least most of the season, the 2 exceptions being Max Fried of Atlanta and Corbin Burns, formerly of Milwaukee, now of Baltimore. So more coming on that. Keith Brugman chimes in. Keith, how you doing, bud? I really appreciate everything that you've done to help me get this show going, and everything that, everybody over at Rocky Mountain Sports Network has helped initiate. Says, Scoops, there's been a lot of discussion around pitching and injuries. Do we ever get back to location pitching over velocity pitching? So again, tying into what I was just saying, I believe honestly that there's a strong argument to make that it's the break more than the velocity, I think. I do think that control pitching is sort of like that control artist, that pinpoint type pitcher, painting the black, however you want to phrase it. I do think there's a strong argument for that being something that has kind of fallen out a little bit. But there was just a comment up from Kenny. If we could bring that back up, please. Thank you. Just something that I think has to be examined more. But I mean, I agree with you. I don't think that leaning too much into anything, too heavily over an extended period of time. I think that it's always good to kind of try and balance yourself as best as you can, especially if you're trying to have an extended career. Thoughts on this pitching formula? If I was running the Rockies, I would go all in on a good bullpen, whether it's through the minors or free agency, get as many 1 to 3 inning solid pitchers as possible instead of starters going 5 or 6 innings and then blowing games with the bullpen. Sorry, that was long. Have you watched my shows? That there's no way that you could be as long-winded as I am, Troy. Please, I really appreciate your thoughts on this. And yes, I do believe that. We've seen the formula work in the past. I mean, we've seen teams like Tampa Bay do it using openers and such, which I am a fan of doing, particularly at the back end of your rotation. But no, I think that there's, and I talked about it regarding other organizations to start the season. Once the sort of the starting pitching market started to dry up a little bit, I was heavily arguing that teams that needed pitching should just stack that bullpen and just start like you said. And we've seen guys like Andrew Miller with Cleveland a few years ago have a really strong ability to do that. Kansas City, the year that they won, was pretty solid at it. Tampa Bay I know they haven't won the World Series, but they got to it with a similar formula. Pardon me. I think both Keith and Kenny, I think both of y'all are, pretty solid on that with regard to the fact that there's some reevaluation that should be done with regard to not just how pitching is trained and developed and whatnot, but also what you're doing with those pitchers once you're, in games. Jody Moncrief says, do you think Bud Black is a good manager? Yes, I do. I particularly was a fan of his when he was in San Diego. Again, I think that it's kind of hard to judge certain managers in certain situations. I think it's harder to judge, whether it's a coach or a manager or in other sports, let's say a quarterback, whatever. I think sometimes it's harder to judge certain people in those positions if they're in certain situations. Like, for example, I had a lot higher expectations last year for Bruce Bochy than I did for I can't think of his name right now, but the guy who was managing in Cincinnati. There's if you're in a situation where you have more talent built up and where you have a more quote unquote ready to win roster, I'm automatically going to have higher expectations for you. I think Bud Black, for some teams that he's had, I think he's done pretty well with them. I think that there's a good number of teams right now who, if he became available, they would consider Bud Black an upgrade to the manager that they currently are employing. Excuse me. Pardon me. I think I will be curious, though, if he ends up being a kind of a scapegoat at the end of the season. There's sort of a propensity in recent years for, whether it's manager, hitting coach, for guys to kind of make change for change's sake. I think that Bud Black should get a chance to be manager through at least a couple years of if you want to call it I don't know if I would say rebuild, because again, I think they've been in a rebuild for a couple years, but I think that he deserves at least a year or two with some of the young core to kind of give a chance to show that he's able to lead that locker room and lead that clubhouse and the team on the field the right way, because I think that he has built up enough both in Colorado and in prior jobs. I think he's shown that he can do more with less better than a good number of managers can do. I liken it to, and I made this similar comp with Kevin Cash of Tampa Bay on another show a while ago, where he kind of reminds me of the show Chopped, where you're basically given 5 random ingredients and you have to impress, 3 top culinary experts with something. That's kind of where I tie in guys like Kevin Cash and Bud Black is, basically, hey, here's, a lizard, and here's, 3 different types of cheese that have been, aged for, 30 years, make something edible out of it. So I think sometimes that's the situation he's been thrown into. So I think you have to contextualize these types of situations as well. I don't think you can look at every manager purely based on their wins and losses, and just solely based on that make your interpretation of him or her in hopefully some cases going forward. He says, thanks, Scoops. You passed the professor's test with an A+ tonight. Thanks, Kenny. It's the best I've done on a test in a long time. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing what you've got for me going forward. Trevor says, there is talk that the Rockies want to bring me a second. Bring back Bud Black. Say that 4 times fast. Both sides have expressed interest. Black's contract expires after this season. I definitely believe that he is somebody who, again, should get a real strong look as, getting an extension. But one of the questions earlier was, what was the first move you'd make if you took over the Rockies? Except they said as GM. Unfortunately, as the GM, I can't cut out the influence of Charlie Monfort, unfortunately. Or that would, I think, be a pretty obvious, first move to try and make, because there's just, and again, it's a lot of it's just sort of your organizational flow, if you want to call it that. There's some organizations that just have a lot more heavy-handed, whether it's owners or GMs or even the managers in certain situations, but just the manager of 30 years ago, whether it's a Lou Piniella or a Joe Torre or a Bobby Cox or a Tony La Russa, those guys who are, they're the big man on campus and kind of everything flows through them. It's a little bit different now, and a lot of current and former managers have said that. In fact, that was one reason why Mike Socha, I believe it was, former Anaheim Angels manager. I think that was one reason why I think it was him who stepped away, is he saw that there was a lot more outside influence, a lot more voices having influence in, what happens in pregame preparations and such, which again, you can argue whether that's good or bad. I think that there's arguments to be made for both sides, but it is how it is. And I think that just the job and the priorities, I guess, of what it is to be a successful manager now have changed a little bit. And and again, you're managing now. And again, I don't think this happens as much in baseball, because baseball players don't seem to be as active on social media as, let's say, NBA or NFL players. But I think now you're not just managing guys on the field, you're managing sometimes egos, you're managing, chaos in, locker rooms. Because again, 20, 30 years ago, this type of locker room chaos type stuff was, you weren't hearing about it in real time. You weren't hearing about, a fight at practice, at MetLife Stadium. You weren't hearing about it 5 minutes later. So I think when you have some of that, you've got, social media, you've got, obviously all the money now in these organizations that, you could buy, at one point you could buy these organizations for a couple $1,000s or whatever. And now these organizations are typically multi-billions, or at least very high 100 millions. So there's so much of that ties in now, that I think, people who are looking at, a Bud Black or somebody else, through the lens of the way that they looked at somebody like a Tony La Russa or a Bobby Cox or a Joe Torre, anybody of those names. I think that, again, you just kind of have to through a different lens, not saying that it's easier or harder, or that they matter less or more now, or whatever the case may be. But I just think that it's an apple to an orange, I think, at this point. Because I just think that if you wrote out a job description of what the average MLB manager does and the average MLB GM does, for example, I think it's just not the same as it was during, let's say, the time of even the early Yankees dynasty, I would say. But certainly not, going back to some of the 1980s or 1970s with some of those, the Reds and the Royals and some of those, I wouldn't say dynastic teams, but those teams that were really consistently, the Athletics, winning, for consistent years and having one manager for long extended periods of time. Just, a different beast these days. And it's kind of interesting to hear different perspectives on that from people both within the game and people who are more on the journalistic side of the game. But that's my kind of long-winded context on my whole feelings on Bud Black. Keith Brugman says, great show, Scoops. Can't wait for episode number 3 and more Rockies wins. Keith, can't thank you enough. And again, shout out in particular to Keith and to Trevor, he was on last week, and to, of course, the other guys over at Rocky Mountain Sports Network, Jody and Mr. Dutchy, everybody over at K&K as well, who has been tuning in on these shows in recent weeks. Very grateful for the support from my friends at both networks. Bonus question from Kenny says, could you see Rockies going young next year at manager? The Athletics manager is Stephen Voigt, and he just retired after 22 seasons, only 39 years old. Voigt played for the Athletics. Actually, just want to clarify, he's actually the manager of the Cleveland Guardians, but which actually the Yankees were supposed to be playing tonight against the Cleveland Guardians, and that got washed out, unfortunately. So there'll be a doubleheader tomorrow. For those who are watching, who I know are also New York fans. But I think that that's certainly possible. I'm not I'd be having a hard time kind of just guessing who would be a solid manager for them out of their history. If you're looking at a former Rockies player in particular, I don't know if that's like something that a Helton or a Holiday or one of those guys. I don't know if that's something that would be up their alley or something they would be pursuing doing. But I definitely can see the value of a recent former player coming in and doing that. I think it's certainly more normalized now than it was a few years ago when people like, whether it was, whether it was Boone or whether it was, I'm blanking on the name of the guy in the NL East, but there's been a good number of guys who are doing more, and I'm enjoying seeing that. I liked Stephen Voigt when he was playing, even when he was with Milwaukee. Even though I didn't see him quite as much over there, but that's also catchers in particular. That's why I'm going to be curious watching guys like Posey, Molina, guys like that. You even heard about guys when they retired, guys like Matt Wieters. I think that because of the influence they have in the game and because of the responsibilities they have both in the flow of each play, but also outside of it, I think that they'll. Joe Girardi for the New York guys out there was obviously a former catcher, as one among many. Kenny says Mark DeRosa is a name I could see replacing Bud Black if he's a scapegoat. That's a great name that I've heard connected to a few openings. I think he interviewed for Toronto, I want to say recently. I watch him on MLB Network a lot. I think he would be a solid choice somewhere. There's a few guys that I've seen as recent players who I think could be really interesting. I was touting Raul Ibanez for years as a potential manager. My understanding is that he hasn't really he didn't want at the time to make that transition out of the front office, which I believe he was with LA at the time. But guys, there are a good number of either current players or recently retired players who I definitely would have on my list if I were looking for a manager. Kenny says, great show, Scoops. Thank you so much. I don't want to go 10 minutes over the buzzer like I did last time, but okay. Trevor says, just like getting a GM from outside the organization would be helpful, getting a manager from outside the Rockies organization would be better. They need new ideas of Black as let go. Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going earlier with that whole, with when I was asked about if I took over the Rockies, what would I do? It's like, I'm getting outside voices. I'm getting guys who have not been entrenched within the, if you want to call it the Rockies ecosystem over the last few years, because it ain't working. Whatever it ain't working. So I'm not going to keep trying to double down on what it is not working by just promoting guys who are already part of the process that's not yielding the results that I want. I'm going and getting guys from, whether it's Houston or Atlanta or LA or, we've even seen people, cross sports from other successful organizations. If you can get someone from, the Kansas City Chiefs, as an example, I'm just, throwing the first name out there I can think of a consistently good team in another sport. But no, I completely agree with you on that. And I think that's, I would be reluctant to say that I think they need to completely shake up, just because I think that they're making some positive strides the last couple of years. But I think that there are certain departments that definitely need to be overhauled, and I would start as far away from the current organization as possible. And with that, I think we're closing out on the comments for the evening. Y'all, thank you all so much for tuning in to episode 2 of Settle the Scores and joining me tonight. This is the first episode, obviously, with just me. But I want to thank everybody who tuned in, from Keith to Trevor to Kenny to Jody, everybody who's been tuning in, whether they commented or just tuned in to view and listen. Really appreciate all the support and all the just coming in and spending some time tonight and enjoying a nice 60 minutes here talking about the Colorado Rockies. And for those who have the time, tomorrow night, catch me again on the K&K Sports Network at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time for my weekly What's the Scoops show. And I particularly if you're a football fan, I promise you're not going to want to miss this episode. I've got a very special guest coming on. I'm very excited about that. Very excited to share his knowledge and wealth of experience with y'all. And I hope that y'all will be able to come in and share in the experience as well and have some fun. But thank y'all very much, and looking forward to coming back for episode 3 next week right here on the Rocky Mountain Sports Network as we settle the scores once again with our Colorado Rockies. Good night, y'all.